Awesome. Well, welcome back, Paul. I mean, you've been on the show a few times, and you have a great history of building software companies. I mean, the one we're going to touch on to begin with, just to give people a flavor of you, is Next Tech 3D AI. Like, I mean, that company moved 40x from its sort of IPO in 2018, which is incredible performance. It just shows that you weren't just building private companies; you could really build public companies, and also in the software, space, being device
Yeah.
agnostic. And maybe just mention that. Tell us about your story and where you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I guess just as a brief background on myself, I have been for almost 30 plus years now building technology companies. I started if you believe it, back in 1992. Took a little bit of time, and in 2012, 2014, began dabbling in holograms, which is pretty cool. It's the kind of thing you would put a sort of a high value individual like a Tony Robbins, a prime
Mm.
minister, a Warren Buffett, you name it, in front of a camera. We'd beam him around the world, and he would see the audience and interact with them in real time. Phenomenal if you wanted to have people that charge for their time, frankly, and put them into two or more places at the same time.
Mm.
Not only did it maximize the revenue and throughput, the engagement level was huge, and frankly, the audiences that participated in that really got a buzz out of it because they're dealing with celebrities and professional coaches on multiple stages at the same time, multiple audiences. You can imagine the community interplay going on with the smartphone, et cetera, really amped up that whole world, if you would.
Mm.
We basically got into building a whole pipeline ultimately that ended up eventually working with groups like Amazon and others who are all doing 3D models basically to convert shoppers to buyers as they're going through the customer journey on a website. What I saw when the Coachella experience, where they had resurrected Tupac, turned
Mm.
him into a hologram, and then beamed him into he was at the concert. It was a pretty significant moment.
Yeah.
What I did is I said, wow, there's a technology that could take the same principles, a subject matter expert, package them up, stream them over the internet. So that began a long walk across a lot of broken glass, fair bit of money, fair bit of time, but ultimately arrived at basically inventing and then patenting holographic telepresence, certainly a form of it.
Just a random question: was the photo of you and Warren Buffett to do specifically with that tech? With I think there's a green screen of you and Warren Buffett. Is that
Oh,
related to
yes.
that?
In that journey, multiple people from Warren Buffett, Carlos Slim, Larry King, here in Canada, we have former Prime Minister Trudeau, multiple high profile business executives. They needed to be in multiple locations at the same time. Educators from, some of the strongest organizations and universities in the world. I mean, Hector, I can't even,
Excellent. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
dozens and dozens of them. Everybody from Deepak Chopra, I got to know Stephen Hawking. They're just, it sounds like I'm
Yeah.
name dropping, so I apologize.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Left that probably, was it
22
2022, I
too.
guess. Took a
Yeah.
little bit of time off, wrote a fun book, got into AI, did a couple of investments, and around 2023 September was introduced to this wonderful opportunity here today, AIML. Yeah.
Yeah, that leads us very nicely on to where we are today. I mean, the purpose of that, just showing that, is just showing that you have a history of credibility and building software companies, and now that takes us to where we are today with
Yeah.
AIML and your neural cloud, neural net solutions, basically pinpointing each heartbeat, measuring that with extreme precision and data sets, bigger than any in the last basically 60 years. So I guess going on to that, explain kind of your current business, its competitive
Sure.
advantages, and what being device agnostic actually means and what that does for you.
And so, long story short, we acquired a number of assets, probably mid 2024, from a group called Naiad Labs, brought in, for lack of a better term, the technology and an acqui-hire in with the principles. And we began to effectively construct what is today all the wonderful products that we've got. Earlier in our discussions about our recap of 2025, if folks want to have a look at that, kind of what we've come through over the term, particularly Q3 and Q4 calendar of 2025, it's been nothing short of blazing and exceptional. What we developed was what is classically known as a long ECG neural net. What does that mean? Typically, ECGs, when they're done, people think of them as these 12 lead, devices. They go on you, you're in some sort of critical care unit, and it's gobbling up electrical pulses of your heart. It's taking in a 10 to 20-second segment. It's returning a strip. Everybody's seen this. It's on virtually every, television show on the planet, anything to do with, medical. However, ultimately what you're looking at is a waveform that has certain patterns in it. And then folks are trained and educated to understand what those patterns mean.
Mm.
Now, that has been going on for the better part of, I'll call it loosely 60 years, but certainly well over 40. And the reason I say that is there are advances being made all the time in the construct of the ECG. But from a technical point of view, probably the big watershed was when Windows came out and they were able to move this from a printed signature into a digital that you could look at. And then out of that came a number of other efforts. But nothing was significant or materially disruptive to
Mhm.
that flow or that process.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned, AI shows up. We're looking at neural networks. We're seeing some pretty incredible activity happening here. And Esmond and his team had been spending a significant amount of time in research using things like the supercomputer that was abundantly available to them at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, to take a bit of a perpendicular approach to understand how to actually measure a heartbeat. And without getting into too much, boring detail, although I'm sure there's a lot of technical people out there who find it absolutely fascinating, what they did is they went in and they looked at each individual heartbeat inside the signal. And the first problem that they had to solve was that almost every recording of an ECG, whether it's 10 seconds to 30 days long, is absolutely riddled with noise. In other words, baseline movement, muscle artifacting, the leads coming off, going back on, having to guesstimate when did the heart stop, when did the heartbeat stop, when did it come back on, et cetera, et cetera. And that is actually one of the most significant impediments to the, I'll call it disruption, evolution, enhancement of understanding the ECG recording. Just the noise. It's so well known, they just call it noise. It's actually a lot more than just noise, but let's leave it at that. What they were able to do was to leave the noise in the signal, but use the machine learning and the neural network to go right into the noise and identify the biometric measurement of the heartbeat. Once they cracked the code on that, they then went a bit further and said, well, there's a constellation of data in every single heartbeat. Every single electrophysiologist, anybody in the cardiology world who understands this knows that if you can crack open a heartbeat and you can actually look at when a P wave started and then stopped, when a QRS complex started and stopped, and then when the subsequent T wave started and stopped, and take those data points and then label them into an Excel spreadsheet, row over row, you will be able to do something with a level of accuracy and precision that has never actually been done before.
Yeah.
And then, so that was the next thing the guys did. Then once they'd accomplished that, they stepped back and said, okay, now that we've got this data table, let's insert a time series set of formulas to produce a complementary data table that looks at heartbeats and how they interact with each other.
Mm.
And when you've got the degree of specificity, the accuracy and the precision that they've got beat by beat, all of a sudden some serious issues start to arise. In other words, you can find heart rate variability to a degree of accuracy that is just currently unavailable, whether it's in the consumer market or the regulated market. More importantly, you can go in and you can see QT segments and other areas within the heartbeat that take manual hours
Yeah.
of human technicians to go in and hand label as they go, literally heartbeat by heartbeat. And in the course of a day, Hector, there's 100,000+ heartbeats. So imagine going through that, looking for very specific anomalies in time series data. It's enormously difficult. And in fact, a huge impediment to everything from research to diagnostic to frankly just understanding your heartbeat, right? In a wellness world. So that was the second data table that we built. The third was to take the heartbeat labeling, the time series, and all the known conditions that are impacting people through cardiac disease. Now, we don't have all of them covered, but we've got a high degree of them. And when I say covered, we can identify them in our data. And as we continue to roll our product out, build more training, more learning, do more ECGs, we are getting better and better and better at identifying all of those anomalies. In fact, right now we are at a super high degree well down the road for regulatory, surpassing all thresholds, and now looking at all the extreme edge conditions that happen one in millions of patients. And so what's super exciting here is what began 18 months ago when I came in and looked at this neural network technology, and where we've come to today is we have, and I can say this very proudly, one of the world's, if not the world's foremost neural network on labeling ECG data, in other words, heartbeats. Whether it's one heartbeat or 3 million heartbeats over a month makes no difference to us. Our ability to process, boom, 100% web enabled. We've manufactured our technology so that it can go on device, it can be in the cloud, and it can even work in an intranet environment so a hospital's got the security umbrella over it. At the same time, as most of our shareholders know, through the first part of 2025, we were very quiet on what we were developing and what we were doing. Frustrated a lot of our shareholders, but I had to take that posture because we needed to get all of this IP into the pipeline for patenting, into trademarks, into a proprietary moat. All of that is in place, is now institutionalized within the business. We've in fact been granted our first patent. Fairly strong, field of view for us to operate in. Very, very little, if any, prior art that we're sitting on top of. So we are in a great position, and we have easily 10x'd everything that we got our initial patent on with new materials and continue to do so virtually every month. And for those that follow us, we make no secret of it. Wolf Greenfield, one of the top life sciences law firms on the planet. I think they're the sixth largest in the world. Number one in life sciences. They've been working with us hand in glove on this endeavor, and I don't see that stopping. In fact, if anybody goes through our financials, you'll notice we spend a fair bit of money working on IP, proprietary, and trademarking. So that's the technology. On the regulatory side, we've really muscled up through Q3 and Q4 after going through that, sort of consultant use, everybody telling you what to do. We decided to institutionalize that complete world. We brought in a number of key resources. They work for us full time, and it has been nothing but a blessing. We've now a fully integrated team between our product, between our IP, and between our regulatory, working every single day in tandem with each other, and that's gone remarkably well.
Mm.
Remarkably well.
Yeah, no, it's really impressive, especially all the IP. I mean, I've tested the product, I've seen the app, I've seen the level of detail. I was flabbergasted.
Yeah.
I can see how this is so accurate and how you're actually converting the data, and it's not been done before. The huge number of press releases with all the pilots as well. The fact that there's so many different markets, but there's too many markets to do, so you just have to focus on one, but then keep building
Yeah.
from there.
Well, let
Um,
me tell you, Hector, where we kind of landed, coming out of 2025. It was very clear that we had a deep tech neural net basket of IP, right? And there are a multitude of ways to commercialize that, which are all underway. There's the licensing of that IP into the wearable market. There's the licensing of that IP into the regulated market, because all the regulated devices can utilize these enhanced ECG outputs. And as we go through regulatory clearance of these algorithms, they'll be able to fold them in quite nicely. So we suspect that will all happen through the first half of 2026. So that's a fairly substantive effort and inflection point. But what I will say for the shareholders is our business nets out very simply. We as a business, we live right in the middle between the capture of that ECG signal and then its downstream exploit, its use. In other words, we capture the recording, could be in real time or near real time, or frankly, you can just send us the file, and whatever time you want, you press a button and it basically neuralizes it.
yeah.
And then we take that data and we make it available to any products that want to use that high fidelity of accuracy and precision, the fiduciary data points, if it were, as it were, of the heartbeat. So this is everything from any of the consumer wearable apps that are currently floating around on the planet, which you all know is a massive market, any of the regulatory applications and software systems, which is an enormous market by every measure. And then also where I'm finding great interest, two areas that were somewhat unknown to us through the first half of 25. We got glimpses in 20 or late part of 25, but definitely part of 26. Number one, research in animals. Okay, so using it preclinical. and then actually in the veterinary space. So horses, dogs, cats, and other animals. Phenomenal opportunity for us in that space as well.
Yeah.
And so these markets are starting to grow for us and will continue to grow. So we're very excited about that. But our business, anywhere we can take an ECG recording, neuralize it, and then exploit that downstream signal is
Yeah.
where the neural cloud will reside.
Yeah. It sounds like half a billion dollar company already, just on the IP, the pilots you announced. I think there was 10 plus press releases in just 30 to 60 days. How
Yeah.
many of those, I mean, you've touched on it there, sort of first half of 26, how many of those do you think are going to be sort of binding agreements that come to real revenue for the company?
Well, I think what we'll find is, I want to say all of them.
Mm.
If we can get, eight out of every 10, pilots
Mm.
into a definitive, hey, awesome work, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't see why that wouldn't happen. These parties don't come into pilots on the assumption that it's a swing and a miss.
Yeah.
What I'm most excited about is, clearly working with parties like Sick Kids, not just because that's a great institution. It's worldwide, significant hurdle to get into. But they just do good things.
Mm.
Anybody that's, had a child, we were all kids at one point,
Mm.
knowing there's a backstop of a hospital for sick children, sick kids.
Mm.
Here, at least I'm in Toronto in our backyard, but globally they're recognized. There's 250 children's hospitals around the planet. Sick Kids has won best of for 2 years running. It
Yeah.
is, you can call it the number one, but it's certainly within the top three. So it is an outstanding organization. But it really speaks to the ethos of the team and the culture that we've built here, Hector. And that's
Mm.
probably when things have gone and I'm out and the world's moving forward, the look back for us is not that we were just a commercial success,
Mm.
but that we were a socially conscious and well-meaning company that brought incredible value at human scale to an issue that, we live at a fulcrum point where the ECG for any age, but let's even just talk 18 and up,
Mm.
you have shortness of breath, you have cardiovascular concerns, your journey begins with an ECG, no matter what. And not just your journey, but all the subsequent points that you go back to get measured, to get maintained, to get relevancy around, the preventative nature, as it were, or being proactive around your rehab. ECGs will be central to that journey. And
Yeah.
so the higher quality data sounds small, but has a disproportionately huge impact on how you get treated through that journey.
Yeah.
That's the problem that we're solving. That's why we've got a wonderful advisory board of some of the best cardiologists on the planet, the best electrophysiologists, because they share in that journey with us. In fact, they've spent decades themselves as physicians with that journey, right?
Yeah.
So it's been
Yeah.
just phenomenal.
Yeah, no, exactly as that. I mean, I have many medics and doctor friends, and being preventative, spotting early with extreme accuracy is that nothing trumps it. And you guys are literally
Right.
that to an absolute T. I mean, you touched on a few markets there. I mean, how and there's too many markets and too many big numbers to say, but maybe touch on one. Like, how big's the market size? What would you anticipate your size or market share in this? Because it is really just a plug and play thing. You're device agnostic. You plug into a specific market.
Yep.
You can take the audience and size of the Polar, Samsung, Garmin's of the world. Yeah, touch on a bit of that.
Yeah, so let me maybe I'll break the markets into three very specific segments that we're focused on. They're all tens of billions in addressable market.
Mhm.
As we go through 2026, pretty much all those addressable markets are
Mhm.
serviceable by us, and I'll explain. So number one, without a doubt, the world of wellness,
Mhm.
which uses principally PPG, the lights you see on your phones, on your rings, the Polar that you mentioned. That world is changing dramatically around the concept of a one lead
Mhm.
ECG device. So if you're in performance athletics, if you're into weight loss management, et cetera, and you really do want a true or sleep management, recovery management, you want as accurate a heartbeat as you can possibly get because all the downstream exploits, the uses of that information are predicated on the accuracy of that heartbeat. We fit wonderfully and very elegantly into that market segment.
Mhm.
There are, gosh, 800 plus million wearable devices. I mean, Hector, I don't know the
Yeah.
exact number. You can,
You don't
sir,
need
your
to. Yeah,
viewers
yeah.
can
It's
look it up. It's
yeah.
it's it's just mind-boggling. My expectation is that the one lead ECG through 26, 27, 28 will become more and more of that wellness market, wellness story. We fit beautifully in there. Our Insight 360 product, which visualizes that data, wonderful. So I see us picking up a few percentage points within that market segment.
Mhm.
That could represent tens of millions of dollars in annual licensing fee to a company like AIML. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's why we're into that consumer space. I view it as a scientific wellness angle. It's very unique because we're using high quality fiduciary data points of your heartbeat to inform those applications around things like your heart rate variability, and then all of the outputs that they, like Apple Health, Samsung,
Mm.
Google Health, Whoop, the Aura Ring, et cetera, would be using to communicate to their consumers, right? So, or customers. And so that's a great market for us.
Mm.
The second market, which is where you'll start to see an awful lot of excitement and where these pilots, Hector, that you've been talking about really have an impact, is in the clinical diagnostic market. So this is for cardiac clinical diagnostics, going in and getting anywhere from a 1 to 3 lead
Mm.
Holter put on your chest. I'm going to explain that industry just briefly for your shareholders or your audience. Number one, cardiovascular disease is arguably the most significant health concern on the planet. It is a humanity scale effort. 1 in 2 people are impacted directly by cardiovascular disease. Probably, I don't know the exact numbers. Again, I have them in our data tables for our latest
Mm.
update, but ultimately, the World Health Organization views it as the number one killer on the planet.
Mm.
And if you look at the cascade of ailments, health concerns, there's cardiovascular disease up at the top. There's a lot of daylight, and then there's all the other ailments below that. Like, this is just literally the number one.
Mm.
And in the diagnostic journey of cardiovascular disease, the ECG represents, in many cases, by a far measure, the start of the journey.
Mm.
So ultimately, what ends up happening is I'm short of breath, I've had an episode, etc. You go with a primary physician, they refer you either to a cardiologist or they ask you to go to a clinic, get a Holter. That gives them a 24, 48 hour, 7-day, or 14-day view into your heart. That is really what our software helps solve immediately. But from that point forward, your journey has essentially begun.
Mm.
And that market is global. There are easily in the United States 100 million medical ECGs performed annually. Globally, it's well over 300 million. These are medical, these are reimbursable. These are items that you've got to go through clinics for. This is a huge, huge market, tens of billions of dollars in revenues flowing through a system. Every country has this problem.
Mm.
When I looked at it, really what I wanted to do was figure out how we could go into the market. Now, you need to be regulated. So we went in and we built our algorithm and we applied and continue to go through the FDA. We're also in Health Canada, and I'm going to talk momentarily about Jamaica and what we're doing there. At the same time, on top of the algorithm, we built a clinical diagnostic support tool called CardioYield, which has been under development now for the better part of a year. It is by far what I believe to be the best cardio diagnostic support tool on the planet. It's web-based, it's clean sheet, ground up built. Everybody that's using it loves it. The cardio techs, cardiologists, etc., the clinic operators. It does 3 wonderful things right out of the box.
Mm.
Number one, it increases throughput, which means you can do more with your same amount of cardio techs in your same workflow. That's significant because there is an unlimited backlog of Holter reports to be produced. The second thing it does is it does it at a cost and a price point that is, I'll just put it politely, significantly disruptive to the current price points and costs that are in the market today. And the third thing, and probably most important, is that its accuracy and its ability to provide quality outputs is as good or better than what is in the market today. And as we go through the regulatory process, once we've got clearance, people will be able to see and benchmark it on their own because they'll have a truly regulated tool working within a truly regulated environment. And plenty of these third-party A/B tests will come to light.
Yeah.
Now, that's exactly what the pilots are doing right now, is they're taking in cardio yield, they're putting it into their workflows, they're evaluating. They can't use it in any capacity other than that because it isn't yet regulated. And we're not expecting them to use it in that capacity. We just want them to view it, review it, and work with us to ensure that it's moving in the direction that we've always thought of.
Mm.
And so that's all underway. So clearly, once we've gone through the regulatory clearance, having the ability to turn that on will mean that we'll be able to bring this phenomenal technology into that market.
Yeah.
Again, there's a commercial aspect to this, but there's also a social good aspect. That is the increased throughput, the increased capacity, and the quality of report.
No, exactly. That's very important. I mean, that's very impressive as well. Like those institutions won't feel like they have to change because it's just just increasing our throughput, using our existing resources, and now can just plug and play with this. I mean, just touching on the numbers there, I mean, it sounded like tens of million from the wellness sector, hundreds of million from this sector, and you got a market cap of only 7 million. So you can see
I
immediately
know, right?
how. So you can see, yeah, you can see immediately for people watching how this could be a huge uplift in the
Well,
company
the,
and
the the
shareholders.
the
Yeah.
third market, so everything you've just described, it's blue, it's all horizon for wellness consumer. I do believe that users, anybody watching this, if you are using a watch, a wearable, you're trying to quantify the data in your body, you're going to hit a threshold where you want as accurate as input as possible. And that's really what our neuralized technology does.
Mm.
In the clinical space, it's not just a light switch. You don't get regulated and it just turn on.
Mm.
Anybody that's commercialized software knows you've got incumbents, there's a whole process that you go through. But we have developed our software to make that as seamless and easy as possible,
Mm.
primarily because it's 100% web-based. It's easy to light up. You log in, you're good
Yeah.
to go. But there's a third market there's two others. They're not as well. One is as big, the other is a little bit smaller. The third market is in research and this ability to work with a number of pharma organizations, academic organizations, hospitals, and research institutions, all of them in the pursuit, whether it's preclinical or clinical trials, anything that they work on that has even a remote impact on your heart, which, to be frank, is almost everything, requires ECGs and labeled ECGs, and then obviously the ability to measure and then manage them through whatever the trial process is. So our tools are uniquely suited to build efficiency, cost savings, and benefits there as well. So I
Mm.
see that market as growing. The numbers, you can look into it, but there are tens of billions a year into these clinical trials, preclinical trials, which are generally non-human, which brings me to our fourth market. In the effort of looking at preclinical, it became very clear that a lot of our neural networks work incredibly well. You're going to laugh, but on mice, on horses, on dogs, cats, etc. And surprisingly, outside of the preclinical, there's a huge market in the veterinarian space.
Mm.
And so think of the equestrian market, which we announced. It was quite interesting. In the canine market, very big, a lot of surgeries there. All of these require some level of ECG commitment. And believe it or not, it doesn't take much. You can Google it. There are a number of ECG related devices for those animals.
Yeah.
And all of those, shockingly, don't have, the high quality fidelity capture, the accuracy or the precision that we can bring to that market.
Mm.
So that's one of those wonderful, never thought of, they
Mm.
approached us kind of opportunities.
Yeah.
We don't spend every day on it, but you hear more about that through the first half of 26 as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds like you're comfortable pivoting to people who come to you and want to do pilots or whatever. I mean,
Well,
that's
what's beautiful about this technology, remember I said we live in that box between the signal capture and the signal exploit.
mm.
And it doesn't matter whether, it's a human
Mm.
or, let's call it non-human, but like a horse or a dog or a cat, um, you capture the ECG, you neuralize it, and then it's available for exploit downstream to any of the applications. We just want to be inside that toll gate. We live right there. That is one product that serves multiple
Mhm.
markets, multiple markets. And, there's a little bit of nuance in each of them and the neural nets themselves. They're like large language models. They're not technically, but you can think of them in that construct where you just keep adding to them and they get smarter and smarter and smarter. So it doesn't matter whether you feed it with a signal for a
Mm.
dog or an 82-year-old female, you're going to get the precision and accuracy that you would expect from
Yeah.
neuralizing that recording. So that's the beauty of it. That's why I believe this is almost asymmetric in value. We are in a very low price point for our stock. I believe the IP, I believe our regulatory pathways, our product market fit, our early commercialization efforts, the pilots that we're underway with, will all bear fruition as we go through the next 6 months,
Yeah.
and we'll clip out into a pretty healthy second half of 2026.
Mm.
We as a business don't spend an awful lot of money given what we've been able to do, so our burn is relatively low,
Right.
particularly in contrast with the outputs that we're achieving and the milestones that we're hitting. So we will at some point, Hector, hit an inflection point, and she will run from there. We're quite confident
Mhm.
because the business basics are solid here.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing I'd want to communicate to anybody that's watching this today.
Yeah, yeah, and attention is exponential. I mean, once a big bulk of attention comes, more and more comes. So
Yeah.
it's very exciting. But just quickly going back a tiny bit, touch on the products. I mean, there's sort of free max yield, insight, cardio yield,
Yeah.
the price of those, and then most interestingly for potentially shareholders, kind of the profit margins for you guys, and then what that'll mean in terms of revenue and profits.
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So we are working pretty much daily on pricing. And here's what I mean by that. And people have heard me say this before. Pricing is a bit of a random walk around value.
Mm,
And in the early days, was we begin to cement our pricing, there's three principal products that we would sell, which in reality is we would license. The first is our core neural net technology. So this is a party who has a device. They would like to license from us our patented and proprietary methodology. We would then essentially develop a neural net for their device. It would
mm,
use our existing ECG capability and then their net new off of their signal to combine. That would be a license.
mm,
Why I love that is we get a fee and a license for that. So a fee to build it, a license to use it.
mm,
But then as that particular neural net grows, we will get reciprocal revenues, an on-stream revenue. I don't want to use the term royalty because it is like a royalty, but it's essentially in a recurring revenue model that
mm,
will continue to roll forward. The second thing we would do is we would license Insight 360 to groups that would like to use it to actually exploit or utilize all of the ECG recording. So if it's performance athletics, there's a whole rack of devices and efforts and programs there. It's quite frothy. If it's rehab, where people are looking at it from a rehabilitation process, so physiotherapists, etc., another massive market. If you are looking to do, and in the context of rehab or performance, sleep recovery, if you're into nutrition and weight management, it's very significant to be able to use the level of recordings that you're getting, particularly from low cost, one lead ECG devices to help you as you go through your weight loss or your weight management program. So all of these fit into that genre I was referring to as scientific wellness. Scientific only in the context that we're able to get the degree of specificity of your heartbeat to then inform all the other items downstream with that. So in the hands of the right people, be it a coach, be it a physiotherapist, be it a nutritionist, this is a wonderful tool. So
yeah,
licensing Insight 360 into those segments is underway. And there we're playing with different price points. Could be, a few dollars per ECG recording or just a flat fee monthly,
mhm,
flat fee into I'll call it the coach, the physio, the nutritionist, or perhaps right down to the end user. We're just playing with that, but I can tell you it's all margin. In
mhm,
other words, there's very, very little costs on our end
mhm,
to neuralize an ECG recording. That's the good news.
mhm,
On the clinical side, again, we're still waiting for clearance. So to put an actual number on it right now, pre-clearance is really not fair. The
mhm.
reason I say that is once we've cleared, once we're in, and once we're being used, the price points will change from whatever I described today because we'll be more informed with what the market will bear.
Yeah.
If we go with what the market's currently spending, Hector, these are in the several thousand per seat per month licenses.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, you have literally fees for recordings,
Mm.
for different types of reports, et cetera, et cetera. It is a little bit of a basket that you can play with. So what I generally tell people is let's swag anywhere from 2,500 to 5 grand US per month per seat for the use of cardio yield in that type of clinical setting. Again, until we've gone through the clearance, I can't really tell you
Yeah.
firmly what that number will be.
No, no, but
And that is
that's helpful. I hadn't thought of obviously the price of the product, but I hadn't thought of sort of the licensing, the royalties. There's
right.
many different ways that
Yeah.
you guys can commercialize.
And then
Um,
let me come back to the Jamaica story because that's fairly near and dear to my heart and something that I think is going to prove to be quite phenomenal. I want your viewers to think of the Jamaica pilot that we're in the middle of right now as being a proxy to an entire rural and remote countrywide initiative. So Jamaica is much like many of the islands in the Caribbean. Good majority of the people live outside of the primary cities. And for a variety of economic reasons, they're not able to get high quality ECG or cardiac diagnostics at all, but just the basic ECG because of cost pressure, geography. Ultimately, it's just challenging. And so Jamaica represents a wonderful opportunity for us to look at a nation state to bring in a very, very low cost single lead ECG, put it through its regulatory pathway, and then make it available countrywide to every citizen, almost as if, well, frankly, for free. We'll leave it to the Jamaican government to determine the price point on this. But the context being that everybody in that country gets fair and equal access
mm,
to an ECG recording. I know it sounds a little bit small. But as I mentioned earlier, the start of every cardiovascular journey begins with an ECG,
mhm,
and it doesn't stop. That ECG recording is repeated time and time again through that journey, in many cases to your end of life. And whether you've succumbed to cardiovascular disease or you've aged out or there's been another reason, I will tell you, you'll still be looking at the ECG as a way to keep and maintain the quality of your heart. Okay,
mm,
so we want to make that available to the entire country. And I like the Jamaican mindset because there's a willingness there. The government wants to work with us, the regulators want to work with us, the parties that work with us on devices. We own that choke point from capture to exploit. So we're in that unique position, that toll gate to make this a reality. Now, as we go through 2026 and we double down and we prove we're able to do this, Hector, that makes every country on the planet a candidate
mm,
for a copy and paste of a rural and remote system, a proxy, if you would, coming out of Jamaica. In Canada, you've got indigenous nations, you've got an enormous geography, you've got a large number of underserved communities that this entire system would replicate. It's equally as significant in the United States, the entire continent of Africa, in Europe, where you are, multiple locations would benefit from this. So this provides us with an aperture into a market segment that most organizations wouldn't even consider because you could never do it at the scale you're able to do it at unless you had our technology.
mm,
So I feel as we go through 2026, not only will we show the commercial viability in the consumer wellness, into the regulatory clinical space, into research, but we're also going to find that we're able to service globally rural and remote communities. That's going to have an enormous impact from a social as well as a commercial perspective for AIML and the Neural Cloud.
mm, mm. Absolutely. I mean, just touching on commercialization again, what sort of, I mean, touching maybe on Jamaica, the clinics, what sort of evidence? I mean, those pilots are pretty much evidence of that
Right.
commercialization. Maybe what sort of feedback as well have you been getting now you've entered into that phase?
Well, what's really interesting is because this is very focused around the efficacy, the scientific viability of it, publications begin to become, spoken around all these pilots. I won't say every single one of them will enter its way into a publication.
Hmm.
Certainly white papers, for instance, because researchers and cardiologists, et cetera, love to communicate peer review with each other. So you'll see more of that. But that's how you'll recognize the evidence. They'll be documented, likely done by the participants within the pilot, those that are doing it. We really at that point step back because they're evaluating the technology, putting it through the paces. But I believe those are going to come out quite positively for us, which just, knocks down the next domino to move into a broader agreement.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what about, I mean, we have touched on it earlier, this sort of the four sectors, and you're waiting for that clearance, FDA clearance. Touch on the differences there, some maybe big and small differences in price and in opportunity. If it's just, do good for the world, like kind of in Jamaica, but it's a kind of continuation. Touch on the difference between regulated and unregulated markets, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in the consumer space, right, where it's unregulated,
Mhm.
you effectively are at a price point that is ultimately dictated by consumers. There's no secret here.
Mhm.
We believe we will fit quite nicely into several licensing opportunities within that space.
Mhm.
Those activities are ongoing right now. We don't need to be regulated for that
Mhm.
as we're going through that selling cycle, people are comparing our technology to, I'll just call it a variety of others. And, those discussions continue to
Yeah.
evolve. I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, no
On
problem.
the regulated side, again, as we're getting closer to clearance dates, and again, it's wickedly out of our control, right? Like I
Mhm.
can't tell our shareholders or even your viewers what the date would be for clearance. It's my belief it'll be within the first half of 2026, although that's a fairly broad, at this
Mhm.
point, 5.5 month window.
Mhm.
My expectation is that we'll stay focused on that and we'll achieve it. So that's all great. Once you are cleared and we are able to move into, quote, that licensing posture, I suspect that those price points will be, I'll just put it politely, significantly greater than
Mhm.
those within the world of the consumer market.
Right, yeah.
Mostly because they fit within a supply chain that is a lot more than just the ECG recording, right? You're at this stage now cardiotechs, cardiologists, potentially EPs. You're over to labs and clinics. You're over to patients. There's an entire sort of wheel there, if you would, that everybody is working in. You're essentially part of, an industrial complex around cardiovascular diagnostics. So there we'll just feather into that, become part of that story. I'm actually quite excited for that to happen because that's not just the Canadian and U.S. market as well as Jamaican, but we're seeing activities now open up in the Middle East. We're seeing activities all throughout Europe, particularly Western Europe, that we're quite excited about. And so, I think those price points will come up a fair bit.
No, I think it's a really good point. I think, you don't need the regulated side of it, but obviously, you can commercialize non-regulated, but there's going to be bigger profit margins, bigger pricing in the clinical and professional space. So yeah, can very much appreciate that. Maybe now touch on kind of share structure, how the company's held. Obviously, the best deals in the world depend on even share structures. So yeah, we could hear about that.
Yeah, so there's roughly about 250 million shares. I think there's about 180, 190 million, call it 200 million warrants.
Yeah.
So there's, a good base of them. I know for the most part, most of our shareholders, majority of them,
Hmm.
and everybody's very supportive of the process that we're in. I don't think anybody's happy with the share price at the moment.
Mm.
But I believe with more messaging, more announcements, things will begin to turn on that front. And nothing screams louder than revenue. At the end of the day, Hector,
Yeah.
people need to realize that this is a startup. It has been working for the better part of 18 months on a very focused mission and mandate. We are 18 months into what is likely a 2-year effort. And I mean to go from back of the napkin, interesting technology that's going all the way to patented, protected mode, regulatory clearance,
Mm.
pilots converted to definitive agreements, sales teams built, the whole nine yards. That is a 24-month run, and we're well into that right now. Everybody can see it. Everybody experiences it. Everybody that's in our orbit can actually feel the vibration of how fun and how much potential is here. And so, I'm very pleased with that. The team we've built, the people we've built, they've been phenomenal.
Yeah.
So you'll see those catalysts start to click as we go through, the next, I'll call it, 6 months, the first half of 26. So that too is also going to bolster the share price. We've got warrants. They're very handy as the company's growing.
Mhm.
That's effectively it from the capital structure.
No, no problem. That's really helpful to know. I think everyone's quite keen to know that and be fully in the picture and transparent, which is great. Maybe touching more on the sort of pain points and some of the things you're solving, just quick fire questions, really.
Sure.
Obviously with the ECG, you're saving a huge amount of time there. I mean, how long does it normally take? What are the pain points there that you're solving?
So what we're doing with cardio yield, so there's max yield that neuralizes the ECG. That in itself is an enormous time saver.
Hmm.
The fact that you can take anywhere from an hour of a recording to 30 days of a recording and do it in a matter of minutes.
Hmm.
Hands down at the degree of specificity, the accuracy, the precision, et cetera, just hands down beats anything that's out there. I mean, so you're taking what could potentially be hours to days of effort down to minutes,
Yeah,
right? Like that. So, sometimes seconds if it's a brief recording.
amazing. Yeah.
And so then you take that, you put it into cardio yield, and you're able to, at that point, as a cardio tech, go through it and actually identify anomalies and conditions and rapidly produce whatever the report is that you're required. Most of the people using this are looking at it as a Holter report, right? A three-lead Holter.
Mhm.
However, you can use it for fitness tests, you can use it for stress tests, you can use it for a variety of other ECG related reports. Okay.
Mhm.
The time to do that is dropped dramatically. Where it shines is in the incredibly difficult recordings
Mhm.
where there's a lot of noise, where the technician in a historical manner has to spend hours filtering through noise, cleaning up heartbeats, manually identifying anomalies. These, I don't say go away 100%, but they dramatically drop
Yeah.
orders of magnitude in quality improvement, meaning that those hours are given back to the tech who's
Mhm.
then able to process and continue to use. Why our cardio techs love using cardio yield with max yield is these are highly skilled individuals. They went to school for 4+ years. Many of them have worked for 10+ years at identifying and working hand in glove with cardiologists to ensure accuracy around these recordings because they're so pivotal in your cardiovascular journey.
Mhm.
Having those folks have to go in and clean up noise, fix this heartbeat, it's the equivalent of basically doing glorified editing in a Word document. You don't
Yeah.
want to, sorry, glorified formatting in a Word document, not editing, formatting, cleaning up paragraphs, tucking the,
Mhm.
that's a waste of their highly valuable time. What they want to do is what they were trained, educated, and excel at, and that is getting the information and then putting it into the report or into a process or a capability that can be delivered to the cardiologist, to the ensuing physicians, and even to the patient if necessary, because that's what they were trained for. That's why they're in that business. So that's the biggest indicator to us that we're on the right path with cardio yield.
Yeah.
When the actual users tell us, oh, finally, we can spend our time and our energy on what we went to school for, what we were passionate about, not formatting a document, but actually going in and being assistive in the process.
Mhm.
That's why I think we're going to have great success with cardio yield. That
Yeah.
to me is a very strong leading indicator.
Really good point. I mean, one of my questions was why do you think this? I mean, I've asked it before. Why is this not being done before? And maybe it is the difficulty, the formatting, the irritation of going through this process and kind of turning
Well,
pictures
I can
into
tell you,
actionable
Hector, why
numbers.
it's
Yeah.
never been done before.
Yeah.
I can tell you straight up,
Mm.
nobody has ever had max yield.
Yeah.
That is the most significant breakthrough in this entire process.
Mm.
I mean, think about it. When anybody thinks about their heartbeat, you go like this, you go on your wrist, you're going poom, 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 and you're looking at what is known as the R peak
Hmm.
between beats. That's your measurement. Now imagine being able to go into that and go, oh, wait, there was this thing called a P wave, and it started here and stopped there. And then there was this thing called a QRS complex. It started here, stopped here, and then there was the RP. Oh, now there's a T, and then I've got that row over row over row. All of a sudden, the accuracy, the precision, what we would refer to as the fiduciary points within that heartbeat now become visible.
Mm.
Now, imagine that data going into all the systems that the incumbent systems that are in place today. They've got these rich, more accurate data sets feeding them, and
Mm.
they're just running their existing algorithms against that data set. The natural output from them is actually going to be significantly better than anything that's out there today.
Yeah.
That's why nobody's been able to do it because they've not had the quality
Yeah.
input to get the quality output.
Yeah. Are there even any competitors? I mean, we've mentioned IP earlier, and I think that's some of your key value and key assets currently. Do you think there's
It
any
is,
competitors out there?
absolutely. Well, no, not right now. I
Yeah.
do believe there. Well, let me clarify. It depends how you want to call a competitor.
Mm.
In in the ability to label an ECG at the way we do right now, I do not believe that there is an incumbent that is able to do that. And I can say that with a fairly high degree of certainty because of all the device manufacturers we speak to who are very interested in our technology for
Mm.
that same. That's the neural net.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are a number of clinical diagnostic support tools in the market. Number of them. You've got, GE, Siemens, Philips.
Mm.
There's a number of tier two, tier three parties out there. They all represent opportunities for us to license our technology into.
Mhm.
And then inside all of that, we've our own product called Cardio Yield. But we are happy to work with any of the incumbents. I mean, this market is so big, it is so huge. Getting a percent of it is significant,
Yeah.
significant. I mean, we would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars of annual recurring revenue if we were into the 1 to 2 to 3% of that market.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
big. Yeah.
And then what sort of protections around that do you have? I mean, your IP and patents, what actually are they and
Well,
how
okay, so yeah, I'm happy to. I'll go as deep as I can, and sometimes I
yeah.
don't want to get into. Um, it's fair. So when it comes to, we'll just call it the proverbial moat of technology,
Mhm.
and I will caution all shareholders that you're in the world of AI. It is a very different world than even 24 months ago when people were
Mhm.
like, let's build a bunch of claims, let's stake some territory, let's build something new, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
In AI, it is a foot race, and human intellect is soon to be superseded by agentic intellect, for lack of a better term, that will allow, whatever you're doing to be force multiplied. So we're
Mhm.
taking everything I'm about to tell you and actually force multiplying it as well.
Mhm.
And so what we did is we built a very specific basket of intellectual property around signal capture to signal exploit. It comes in a variety of different ways, but ultimately it is the labeling of a heartbeat. It's then all the uses and permutations of how that labeling is impacted. And then we did two things. We worked very specifically with our counsel around what would be patented, in other words, eventually public, and what would be proprietary but non-public, which is probably a bigger part of our intellectual property because
Mhm.
there's just some things we don't want in the public domain. It's
Yeah.
trade secret to us and it's proprietary and it's confidential.
Mhm.
More importantly, the device manufacturers and the parties that we work with, they too would wish to keep a lot of that, quote, proprietary.
Mhm.
So that's part of our moat. The third thing we have in that, which is really not so much related to the technology, are the trademarks and the registrations around that. So things like max yield and cardio yield, being able to trademark, register them, etc., quite helpful.
Mhm.
So that is the world of our IP that we kind of maintain. Our engineering, our research, all our development is focused within that confine. Everything we do is evaluated. There's a significant body of it in place, and it continues to compound on a monthly basis. So that's really the IP that we've got.
Yes, it's also interesting you sort of mentioning there how because you're working with other big players, they have their own IP that they want to protect, but they're working with you, so there's also protections there as well, which is
Oh yeah, I mean this
fascinating.
is like let's I don't want to. This is why it's kind of funny when you think you got to call it a 5 cent stock.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we are literally feathering into an industrial complex around cardiovascular disease
yeah, yeah,
with our technology. And so again, when we're able to talk about them, things I think will move a bit. But
yeah.
the truth of it is, you're in an area where, this is the proverbial, the technology is a key enabler. The AI, the neural net. In fact, we're standing on the shoulders of guys like Jeffrey Hinton and all the great work they did with neural nets.
Mhm.
These things are going to radically change healthcare. And anybody that looks at it from that perspective, we are a great proxy into that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, touching on those, there's only two questions left. Touching on those existing kind of deals, collaboration, board members, experts. Is there anything there you really want to? We touched on several of them. But is there anyone you want to highlight right now that come to mind that like you think in your head that's what I'm really focused on?
Well, there's a couple for me that every day that I come in, there's a couple of very key things, right? Number one is how do we continue the commercial pursuit to
Mm,
get to revenue break even, and then huge cash flow, huge
yeah,
margin, profitability. That's just my number one, because that is, in my opinion, the biggest thing I can do as the CEO for all of our
yeah.
shareholders. All
Everything else
right. The
follows,
second
doesn't it, afterwards? Yeah.
it really does. It just drags it up from there, right? Pulls it up, if you would. So that's my first and foremost. And I eat, sleep, and breathe that. Many nights I stay awake on that. The second thing is all about the IP. Close second, regulatory. Although I'm greatly relieved that we've got a fantastic regulatory team on staff. Like, they work with us, they're colleagues. It's spectacular.
Mm,
Product development, which naturally comes out of the commercialization effort, because the product is sufficiently built now that all our new versions are dictated by the discussions we're having at the commercial level, feeding our product roadmap. So we're not sitting around thinking, I bet the market would love this.
yeah.
We're building features into our product that are either current or future customers and users are telling us need to be in the product to make it all that much better. Can't ask for a better situation than that when you're trying to figure out where to put your time, your money, and your people around product. That's the gold. So that's all in play. And so all of those bits begin to formulate as part of the story. What I would propose people look at is we are activating our medical advisory board to a degree this year. Last year was fabulous because they gave us what we needed to get that running curve start to get the product where it is. Now we're just going to continue to grow that and utilize that team in a variety of ways, not just to help us with commercial pursuits and product development pursuits, but to begin to think about what's on the horizon in the world of cardiovascular disease that we can now capitalize on and make better. What would you view as being either broken, or if we were to take this high octane capability and apply it, it would have significant breakthroughs from your perspective? So
Yeah.
you're going to see a bunch of that come out of the second half of this year because of what we're working on with them. And that I think will have as we get into Q2, Hector, and we start talking about the horizon there, I think
Mm.
your viewers are going to be stunned when they see the type of stuff we're talking about today that will materialize into some, what I would say, meaningful conversations in Q2.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's a really good point, and the stuff around the medical advisory board is really important, and I can see how you've built that, and then that resulted in a whole flurry of news and PRs. But also, I like and appreciate how you're saying like then when we hit the next level, we'll then maybe get expand that to expand again.
Right.
Because I think one concern shareholders might have is all the costs associated with bringing on amazing people. But as you're building levels, I mean, there's levels to it, so
Yeah.
it's healthy. I mean, the last question. What sort of catalysts, I mean, sort of was in the last question as well. What sort of catalysts would you say there are for the next 1 to 2 years? I mean, FDA, I think is that big one, but is there any others that come to mind or
I think so catalysts would be the following. Number one, in the non-regulated market, it would be licensing agreements into devices.
Mhm.
And these would be the consumer wearable devices from the, well-known brands around the planet, all the way down to the emerging devices that are coming out to take advantage of low-cost manufacturing, niche markets, etc. That is an incredibly beautiful market for us. You are going to hear and see more announcements in that space over the next 24 months.
Beautiful.
And those are wonderful license deals. They're annual, they're recurring revenue.
Mhm.
The second area is as we go through the regulatory pathway and we gain clearances, FDA, Health Canada, Jamaica, and other jurisdictions, it will be the conversion of those pilots into license agreements for the use of our software within their clinics, within their hospitals, and their institutions. That is, just keep an eye on those announcements as they come out.
Yeah.
The third is, as I mentioned, within research and in the area of veterinary, more announcements. They're lightly regulated and in some cases not.
Mm,
However, they do have a very high hurdle to ensure that anything that is being done, it might as well, frankly, be regulated,
mm,
given the tolerances that those parties operate at. But again, we play beautifully in that space today. So you will see more and more of those announcements. So what I would say is keep an eye on the catalysts of the announcements, the regulatory. We will continue to stay focused on products, product market fit, and commercialization activities. I believe we represent almost an asymmetrical investment into the world of AI and healthcare.
mm.
We live at the proverbial intersection where it's medical tech, healthcare, wellness, all the right attributes are there for us to really scale and grow. But our story is simple. We live at the toll gate from the signal capture to the signal exploit for every heartbeat on the planet. That is basically the business. And I don't want to, I've told
No,
people
it's
this
it's a
before. It has my heart. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really good. I mean, I also like how you're not going too specific because if people just picture what you've just said there, they can then in their own mind imagine where this could
right.
go and then wait for and follow the story and wait for news that
Yeah,
relates to specific new
yeah.
areas or new sectors or doubling down on certain areas. So really good and thank you very much for hopping on. I think it's been helpful and I think a lot of people are going to be excited off the back of this. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. All right, Hector. Thank you,
Cheers.
pal.
Bye bye.